They mistook my silence for submission, believing I would miss the strange perfume on my husband's collar. Julian and his mistress calculated my assets, but ignored the price of betrayal. When New York's most powerful man placed a check for $150 million on my table, revealing their 3-month trap, I ceased being a victim. I became the executioner. Tonight's anniversary gala is not a celebration of love. It is the scene of a brutal social massacre. My name is Aurora Waverly, and at 34 years old, I had cultivated a life that looked flawless from the outside, like a diamond locked behind a museum display case, impeccable, enviable, and utterly cold to the touch. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of our penthouse on the 72nd floor, looking down at the sprawling, verdant rectangle of Central Park. The city of New York was waking up, a gray beast stretching its limbs in the early morning mist. But up here, the air was filtered, silent, and smelled faintly of white tea and loneliness. As the chief financial officer of Ethelgard Dynamics, a biotechnology firm currently leading the race in genomic editing, my mind was trained to seek patterns, calculate risks, and optimize outcomes. I applied the same rigorous discipline to my personal life. My morning routine was a military operation performed in silk and cashmere. I woke at 5 a.m. without an alarm. I drank exactly 1 cup of black coffee, Ethiopian Yirgacheffe, brewed at 200 degrees Fahrenheit. No sugar, no cream. Sugar was a variable I did not need. Cream clouded the clarity. I turned away from the view of the city I practically owned and walked toward the kitchen island. The marble was cool under my fingertips. I opened my tablet to review the Asian markets. The Nikkei was down, but Ethelgard's futures were holding steady. Then, the disruption arrived. "Morning, darling." Julian entered the kitchen, bringing with him the scent of expensive grooming products and that boyish charm that the tabloids adored. My husband, the visionary entrepreneur, as his biography claimed. Though his ventures were mostly smoke and mirrors funded by my bonuses, he was wearing a plush robe that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His hair perfectly tousled. He looked like the lead in a romantic comedy, the kind where the guy gets the girl and the fortune. I just hadn't realized yet that I was merely the plot device for the fortune. "You're up early," I said, not looking up from the red and green candlesticks on my screen. "Big day today," Julian said, pouring himself a cup of coffee and ruining it with 3 sugars. He leaned against the counter, flashing that smile that used to make my knees weak. Now, it just made me instinctively check for my wallet. "I have a meeting with the investors for the clean energy project. We are so close. Aurora, I just need a little bridge capital to finalize the prototype." I paused, my finger hovering over a sell order. "How much is a little?" "Julian?" $50,000, he said, the number rolling off his tongue as if he were asking for loose change for the parking meter. "Just a transfer to the operational account. I will pay it back before the quarter ends. You know how sticky liquidity can get before a launch." I knew everything about liquidity. I also knew that Julian's launches had a habit of being indefinitely postponed. But I was the dutiful wife, the supportive partner. Or perhaps I was just too tired to fight before my caffeine kicked in. "Send the invoice to my personal assistant," I said, my voice flat. "I will approve it if the paperwork is in order." He came around the island and kissed me on the cheek. His lips were warm, but the gesture felt rehearsed. "You are the best, truly. Oh, and speaking of paperwork," he paused, a calculated hesitation that set my internal risk alarms ringing. He slid a thick envelope across the marble counter toward me. "What is this?" I asked. "Just some housekeeping," Julian said, his tone breezy, too breezy. "My lawyer suggested it, with our 5th anniversary coming up in 3 months. Can you believe it has been 5 years? He thought it would be smart to streamline our asset management. It is a limited power of attorney. It just lets me handle the day-to-day maintenance of the properties and the joint investments, so you do not have to be bothered with signatures every time a pipe bursts in the Hamptons house." I looked at the document. It sat there like a coiled viper. To reduce my burden, I repeated, testing the weight of the words. Exactly, he beamed. You are the CFO of a billion-dollar company, Aurora. You should not be wasting your brainpower on domestic administration. Let me handle the small stuff. It is the least I can do. I will read it over, I said, sliding the envelope to the side, away from his reach. A flicker of annoyance crossed his eyes, gone so fast that if I hadn't been watching his reflection in the dark oven glass, I would have missed it. Of course, no rush. But the anniversary's coming up. 3 months. I want everything to be perfect. I want us to be totally in sync. He kissed the top of my head and retreated to his home office, a room where he played video games and pretended to be a titan of industry. 30 minutes later, I was in the back of my town car, a black sedan that smelled of leather and silence. My driver, a stoic man who spoke only when spoken to, navigated the morning gridlock of Manhattan. I opened my briefcase to retrieve a file and stopped. Wedged between the leather seat and the center console was a small, glittering object. I pulled it out. It was a cufflink, a heavy gold knot with a small ruby in the center. It was not Julian's. Julian wore silver or platinum. He thought gold was tacky. I turned the object over in my gloved hand. It felt masculine, old-fashioned, and incredibly expensive. And then, the scent hit me. It was faint, lingering on the leather where the cufflink had been lodged. Santal 33. It was a distinct, aggressive fragrant sandalwood, cedar, cardamom, violet, and leather. It was trendy, ubiquitous in certain circles of the downtown art scene, and utterly overpowering. I hated it. I wore only a custom blend of jasmine and bergamot. Julian wore a light citrus cologne. Someone else had been in this car. Someone who wore Santal 33 and dropped a gold cufflink. Henry, I said to the driver, did my husband use the car last night? Henry met my eyes in the rearview mirror. Yes, Mrs. Waverly, Mr. Julian took the car out around 9 in the evening. He said he had a late strategy meeting in Tribeca. Tribeca. I dropped the cufflink into the zippered pocket of my purse. Thank you. Henry. My arrival at the Ethelgard Dynamics headquarters was met with the usual flurry of activity. I marched past the reception, the click of my heels echoing on the polished concrete floors. My office was a sanctuary of glass and steel. I sat down, booted up my terminal, and did what I did best. I followed the money. But today, I wasn't looking for corporate discrepancies. I was looking closer to home. I pulled up our joint accounts. Julian's spending was always high dinners at Nobu, memberships at clubs he rarely visited, consulting fees to friends who offered no counsel. But as I scrolled through the ledger, a pattern emerged that made my stomach turn. Blue Orchid, LLC. It was a recurring payee. It started 6 months ago. Small amounts at first, $2,000, $3,000. Then, last month, it jumped, $10,000. Yesterday, $20,000. The memo lines were vague. Design consultation, retainer, logistics. I ran a quick search on the corporate registry. Blue Orchid, LLC, was registered in Delaware. A black hole for information. But the registered agent address was a generic P.O. box in the city. It was a shell, a container for money to disappear into. I was staring at the screen, my mind racing. When my private line rang, it was the dedicated line for high-net-worth banking. Mrs. Waverly, the voice on the other end was smooth, apologetic. This is David from Private Client Services. I hate to disturb you at the office, but I wanted to verify a request we just received. Go ahead, David, I said, my eyes still fixed on the words, Blue Orchid. We received a request from Mr. Julian Waverly this morning to increase the credit limit on the joint line of credit. He is asking to leverage a portion of your vested equity in Ethelgard as collateral. Since the equity is in your name, I told him I needed your verbal authorization, but he insisted he has no such thing, I interrupted, my voice dropping to a temperature that could freeze nitrogen. There was a pause on the line. I see. He mentioned a power of attorney was being processed. It has not been signed. David, and it never will be. Do not authorize any increase. In fact, flag the account for any withdrawal over $5,000. I want to be notified personally. Understood. Mrs. Waverly, I will handle it. I hung up the phone. My hand was trembling. Not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage. He wasn't just asking for $50,000 for a fake startup. He was trying to mortgage my career, my sweat and blood. To fund? What Blue Orchid? I left the office at 2 p.m. I told my secretary I had a migraine. It was the first time in 7 years I had left early. When I arrived at the penthouse, the silence was different. It wasn't the empty silence of the morning. It was the heavy, secretive silence of a house holding a lie. I took off my heels at the door, moving across the hardwood floors in my stockings. I could hear a voice coming from Julian's study. The door was closed, but the pre-war construction of the building meant the ventilation vents sometimes carried sound if you stood in the right spot in the hallway. I stood there, holding my breath. She is getting suspicious. I can feel it. Julian's voice was muffled but audible. He sounded agitated. She looked at the power of attorney document like it was a bomb. A pause. He was listening to someone. I know, he hissed. But we have to be patient. Just 3 months, baby. That is all. Once we hit the 5-year mark, the prenup clause kicks in. Half of everything. Plus, if I get her to sign this authorization, I can move the liquid assets before she files. My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful, rhythmic thud. Don't worry, Julian laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that I had never heard before. She is too busy looking at spreadsheets to notice what is happening right under her nose. She is frigid. Anyway, it's like living with a calculator. Just 3 months, and then, yes, everything she has will be ours. I stepped back from the door. The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just an affair. Affairs were banal. Men like Julian cheated. It was a cliché of their insecurity. This was not a crime of passion. This was a heist. He was waiting out the clock, the 5-year mark. My prenuptial agreement had a sunset clause, a foolish romantic gesture I had included when I was 29 and in love, if we stayed married for 5 years. The separation of assets dissolved into community property. 3 months, he was going to endure me for 90 more days, steal half my empire, and then leave me for whoever was on the other end of that phone. I walked silently to the guest bathroom and locked the door. I stared at myself in the mirror. I looked the same auburn hair, the same sharp jawline, the same green eyes. But inside, something had snapped. The hurt was there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was quickly swamped by a much more powerful emotion insult. He thought I was a calculator. He thought I was blind. He thought he could outsmart me. I was the woman who navigated hostile takeovers before breakfast. I was the woman who spotted a 0.05% discrepancy in a ledger of millions. And he thought he could dismantle my life with a smile and a shell company I washed my face with cold water. When I looked up again, the tears were gone. In their place was a terrifying clarity. I waited until I heard the shower running in the master suite. Julian always took long showers in the afternoon, another luxury of the unemployed. I walked into the bedroom. His phone was on the nightstand. I knew his passcode. It was 123456. He was a man of simple intellect. I picked up the device. My hands were steady. I didn't open his messages. I didn't look at his photos. I didn't need to see the grime. I knew it was there. Instead, I opened the browser and downloaded a sophisticated pieces of monitoring software, a tool we sometimes used at the firm for corporate security on company devices. I linked it to a burner email address I had created years ago for market research. It took 45 seconds. I placed the phone back exactly where it had been, aligned with the edge of the coaster. As the water stopped running in the bathroom, I slipped out of the room and went to the kitchen. I started the kettle. When Julian walked out, towel-dried and smelling of my expensive body wash, I would be sitting there, reading a magazine. The picture of the oblivious, frigid wife he thought he knew. Let him think he has 3 months. I had the rest of my life to make him regret every single second of them. The game had begun, and Julian didn't even know he was playing against the house. The little blue dot on my screen pulsed with a rhythmic, mocking consistency. It was 12:45 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. According to his shared calendar, Julian was at a strategy lunch with potential angel investors in Midtown. According to the tracking software I had installed on his phone, he was 4 miles south, stationary in a residential building in Tribeca. I sat in the dark of my office, the blinds drawn against the harsh afternoon sun. The glow of the monitor was the only light, illuminating my face in spectral blues and whites. I was not looking at financial spreadsheets or genomic sequencing data today. I was looking at the geography of a lie. For 3 days, the pattern had been identical. He would leave his co-working space at noon. He would travel to the same address on Greenwich Street. He would stay for exactly 90 minutes. Then, he would return to Midtown, flush with success from meetings that never happened. I needed a name. The GPS coordinates were just numbers. I needed the flesh and blood reality behind them. I contacted Miller, a private investigator recommended by our corporate security head. Miller was formerly with the FBI, a man who specialized in white-collar crime but had a talent for digging up dirt that people thought was buried under concrete. We met 48 hours later in a nondescript coffee shop in Brooklyn, far away from the prying eyes of Manhattan's elite circles. Miller slid a manila envelope across the scarred wooden table. He did not touch his coffee. "You are not going to like this, Mrs. Waverly," Miller said, his voice gravelly and low. I opened the envelope. The first photograph hit me like a physical blow. It was not a sordid, grainy image of a hotel room. It was a high-resolution shot of a woman walking out of the Tribeca building. She was laughing, her head thrown back, looking effortless and radiant. "Serafina Vance," Miller stated. "Interior designer, 28 years old. Her studio is on the ground floor, but she owns the penthouse apartment where your husband spends his lunch breaks." I studied her face. She was the antithesis of me, where I was sharp angles, tailored suits, and cold logic. Serafina was soft curves, bohemian dresses, and apparent warmth. She looked innocent. She looked like the kind of woman who rescued stray cats and baked bread. "She is a mistress," I said, my voice flat. "A cliché." "Keep reading," Miller said. "She is not just a mistress, she is a wife." I turned the page and froze. The man standing next to Serafina in the second photo was not Julian. It was a man much older, with silver hair and eyes that looked like chips of flint. I recognized him instantly. Everyone in New York with a net worth over $10 million recognized him. "Silas Sterling," I whispered. "The real estate shark." Miller nodded. "He owns half the skyline. He is known for 2 things, making billions and destroying anyone who touches what is his. If he finds out your husband is sleeping with his wife, Julian won't just be divorced. He will be erased." A cold shiver ran down my spine. Julian was not just cheating, he was playing Russian roulette with a bazooka. But as I flipped through the rest of the file, the fear turned into a different kind of nausea. Miller had done a deep dive into Serafina's finances. There it was. Blue Orchid, LLC, the shell company receiving thousands of dollars from my joint account, was registered to Serafina's maiden name. They are not just sleeping together, I realized aloud. They are funneling money. "It gets worse," Miller said. He pointed to a section of the report detailing data traffic. "I ran a passive scan on your husband's devices when he was connected to the public Wi-Fi at the coffee shop near her place. He is not just sending money. He is transferring files." I looked at the logs. Project Chimera _phase2.pdf, Ethelgard _Q3 projections.xlsx. My blood ran cold. These were not just files. They were the crown jewels of Ethelgard Dynamics. Project Chimera was our proprietary gene editing protocol. It was worth billions. Julian was stealing my intellectual property, my life's work, and handing it over to an interior designer. Why Serafina couldn't use this? Unless she was selling it, or unless they were planning to use it to destroy me. I paid Miller in cash and walked out into the gray afternoon. The city felt hostile now. Every window seemed like an eye, every passerby a potential spy. I returned to the office, but I could not focus. I felt exposed, violated in a way that went far deeper than marital infidelity. They were dissecting my brain and selling it for parts. 2 nights later, the charade reached a new level of absurdity. We were attending the annual masquerade gala for the Metropolitan Arts Council. I wore a black velvet gown, severe and elegant. Julian was in a tuxedo, playing the role of the doting husband perfectly for the cameras. "You look tense, darling," he whispered, his hand on the small of my back. It felt like a branding iron. "Relax. Smile for the donors." We moved through the ballroom, a sea of diamonds and champagne. Then, I saw her. Serafina Vance was there. She was wearing a white Grecian gown, looking like a descended angel. She wasn't wearing a mask. She wanted to be seen. She glided toward us, her arm linked with Silas Sterling, who looked bored and dangerous. "Julian, what a surprise," Serafina chirped, her voice light and melodic. She acted as if they were barely acquaintances. "Serafina," Julian nodded, a little too stiffly. "And Mr. Sterling, an honor." "Please, call me Silas," the older man grunted, barely looking at Julian. His eyes, however, fixed on me with a strange intensity, as if he were trying to read fine print on a contract. "And you must be Aurora." Serafina turned her gaze to me. Her eyes were wide, blue, and utterly vacuous. "Julian speaks of you so often. He says you are the brains of the operation." "He is too kind," I replied, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I love your dress," she said, leaning in closer. "So powerful." As she moved, the light caught the necklace resting against her collarbone. It was a delicate platinum chain with a single, teardrop diamond pendant. I stopped breathing. I knew that necklace. I had seen the invoice in Julian's wallet 3 days ago. Tiffany Company, $17,500. When I had found the receipt, I had foolishly hoped, for a split second, that it was an anniversary gift for me hidden away early. Now, it was hanging around the neck of the woman who was laundering my money and stealing my trade secrets. "It is beautiful," I said, pointing to the diamond. "A gift from your husband." Serafina touched the stone, a small, secretive smile playing on her lips. She glanced at Julian for a fraction of a second. "Oh, no, Silas thinks jewelry is frivolous. It was a gift from a very dear friend, someone who truly appreciates beauty." The audacity was breathtaking. She was mocking me to my face, wearing my money, stealing my husband, and smiling like a saint. I wanted to reach out and rip it from her neck. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. They have excellent taste. The ride home was suffocating. I stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of neon violence. "You were quiet tonight," Julian said, breaking the silence. "I have a headache." I lied. "You are always tired lately." "Aurora," he sighed, his tone shifting from concern to criticism. "Have you looked in the mirror? You have dark circles. You look old, stressed." He was doing it. He was picking at the threads of my confidence. "I am working 18-hour days, Julian, to support us." "That is the problem," he snapped. "You are obsessed. You are paranoid. You see enemies everywhere. Tonight, you looked at Serafina like she was a ghost. You are losing your grip. Aurora, maybe you need a break." He placed a hand on my knee. "Why not go to that wellness retreat in Arizona, the one with the silence vow? Go for 2 weeks. Disconnect. I will handle the house. I will handle the finances. You need to reset before you burn out completely." It was so transparent it was almost insulting. He wanted me gone. He wanted me out of the state, in a place with no phone reception, so he and Serafina could finalize whatever endgame they had planned. "Maybe you are right," I said softly. Maybe I do need a break. Think about it, he said, satisfied. For your own good. When we got home, Julian went straight to the shower. I went to his briefcase. He had left it on the entryway table. Careless in his arrogance, I opened the leather flap. Inside, beneath a stack of gaming magazines, was a legal document. It was marked draft, confidential. It was an amendment to our prenuptial agreement. But it wasn't the power of attorney he had shown me before. This was a copy of the original document, with notes scribbled in the margins in Julian's handwriting. He had circled a specific paragraph in red ink, Clause 4.2 Sunset Provision. Upon the completion of the 5th year of marriage, all separate property assets shall be reclassified as marital property, subject to equitable distribution. Next to it, he had written target date 3 months. Wait, there it was. The smoking gun. The confirmation of the timeline. Don't wait 3 months wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was the difference between keeping my empire and losing half of it to a man who couldn't even run a lemonade stand without my capital. He didn't love me. He didn't even hate me. He was just enduring me. I was an investment bond that was about to mature. I closed the briefcase. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I ran to the guest bathroom and retched into the sink until there was nothing left. I washed my face. Trembling violently, the sadness I had felt earlier evaporated. The shock faded. What was left was a cold, hard resolve, sharp as a scalpel. I walked into my study and locked the door. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I was not going to wait 3 months. I was not going to let him hit that 5-year mark. I was going to file for divorce tomorrow morning. I would take the hit of the scandal. I would deal with the tabloids. But I would not let him take 1 more cent of my money or 1 more second of my life. I picked up my phone to call my lawyer. It was 1 a.m, but she would answer. "Prepare the papers," I whispered to the empty room. "I am done." I thought that was the end of it. I thought divorce was the nuclear option. I didn't know yet that walking away was exactly what they expected me to do, and that by trying to escape the trap, I was about to walk straight into the jaws of a much larger monster. But in that moment, staring at the red circle around the words, 3 months, all I wanted was to cut the limb to save the body. I dialed the number. "Hello, Patricia. I apologize for the hour. No, it cannot wait. I need to file for dissolution. Immediately. Grounds adultery. And theft. Yes, I want him out of the penthouse by noon." I hung up. Feeling a grim sense of satisfaction, I thought I had taken back control. I had no idea that the real game had not even started yet. The morning air was biting, carrying the metallic scent of impending snow, but I barely felt it. I marched out of my apartment building with the dissolution of marriage papers tucked securely inside my Hermes briefcase. I had called Patricia, my attorney, at 1 a.m, and she had spent the night drafting the motion. All I needed to do was sign the affidavit in her office, and by noon, Julian would be served. I was operating on adrenaline and a singular burning desire to excise the tumor from my life before it could metastasize further. I signaled for my driver, Henry, who was idling at the curb. But before I could take a step toward the car, the screech of tires tore through the morning traffic. 3 black Cadillac Escalades swerved into the loading zone, boxing Henry's sedan in with aggressive precision. It was a tactical maneuver, executed with the synchronized efficiency of a government motorcade. The doors of the lead vehicle opened, and 2 men stepped out. They were mountains of muscle wrapped in charcoal suits, wearing earpieces and expressions of professional indifference. I stopped, my hand tightening on the handle of my briefcase. Kidnapping was a statistical improbability in broad daylight on Fifth Avenue, but in my line of work, corporate espionage sometimes took physical forms. "Mrs. Waverly?" the first man said. It was not a question. He stood between me and my car. "Mr. Sterling requests a moment of your time. Immediately." My heart skipped a beat. Silas Sterling, the shark, the husband of the woman who was currently wearing my $17,500 necklace. "I have an appointment," I replied, my voice steady despite the sudden dryness in my throat. "Tell Mr. Sterling, I will check my calendar. Mr. Sterling was clear, the man said, opening the rear door of the middle Cadillac. He said you are about to walk off a cliff, and he is the only one with a rope. He suggests you get in the car. I looked at Henry, who was reaching for his phone to call the police. I shook my head slightly. Silas Sterling did not kidnap people. He bought them. If he was intercepting me this publicly, it meant the situation was already critical. I climbed into the back seat of the Cadillac. The interior smelled of new leather and ozone. The windows were tinted so dark that the city outside looked like a shadow. We drove in silence for 10 minutes, heading uptown toward the Upper East Side. We stopped in front of a heavy limestone building with no signage. The Olympus Club. It was one of those private establishments where membership was not applied for but inherited, and where deals that shifted the GDP of small nations were made over glasses of single malt scotch. I was escorted through a mahogany-paneled lobby, past portraits of robber barons from the 19th century, and into a private library at the back. A fire was crackling in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the rows of leather-bound books. Silas Sterling was sitting in a wingback chair by the fire. He did not stand up when I entered. He looked exactly like his photos, perhaps even more intimidating in the flesh. He was a man carved from granite, with silver hair swept back from a forehead etched with the lines of 1,000 ruthless decisions. He held a tumbler of amber liquid in one hand and a cigar in the other. "Sit down, Aurora," he said. His voice was deep, resonant, and devoid of warmth. I sat on the sofa opposite him, placing my briefcase on the floor. I did not cross my legs. I maintained a posture of alert readiness. "Mr. Sterling," I began, "if this is about your wife and my husband, I am already handling it. I am on my way to file for divorce." Silas took a slow drag of his cigar and exhaled a plume of blue smoke. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and amusement. "Divorce," he repeated the word as if tasting something sour. "That is your plan. You find out you are being robbed, so you run to a lawyer to ask for permission to leave." "I am cutting my losses," I said sharply. "I know about the affair. I know about Blue Orchid, LLC. I have evidence." "You have crumbs," Silas countered. He reached down and lifted a thick black folder from the floor. He tossed it onto the coffee table between us. It landed with a heavy thud. "This is the whole loaf." I reached forward and opened the folder. The first few pages were photographs, far clearer than the ones my investigator had taken. These were taken inside the apartment. High-definition images of Julian and Serafina in compromising positions were the least shocking part. It was the other photos that made my blood run cold. Julian photographing documents on my desk. Serafina holding a flash drive that looked identical to the one I kept in my safe. "I know they are stealing trade secrets," I said, trying to maintain my composure. "That is why I am filing. I will sue them for corporate espionage." "Turn to the last tab," Silas commanded. I flipped to the back of the folder. There was a USB drive taped to the paper and a transcript of an audio recording dated 3 days ago. I scanned the text. "Julian, she is going to file soon. I can feel it. She is getting restless. Serafina." "Did you get the signature, Julian?" "Yes. I traced it onto the merger documents for the Phoenix acquisition. It is perfect. Once the audit hits, it will look like she authorized the transfer of the debt to the offshore holding company. Serafina good. If she files for divorce now, the investigation starts immediately. She will be in federal custody for tax fraud and embezzlement before the ink is dry on the petition. Julian. And with her assets frozen and her reputation destroyed, the board will have no choice but to appoint me as interim CEO to stabilize the stock. By the time she proves her innocence, if she ever does, we will have stripped the carcass clean." My hands began to tremble violently. I dropped the folder. "He forged my signature," I whispered. "On the Phoenix documents." "The Phoenix acquisition," Silas said, leaning forward. "That is the deal you are closing next week. Correct a merger with a company that, unknown to you, carries massive toxic debt. Julian has set it up so that you personally guarantee that debt. If you file for divorce today, You trigger a compliance review. They will find the documents. They will find your signature. You will go to prison for fraud. Aurora. Minimum 10 years. I stared at him. The room seemed to spin. I wasn't just losing my marriage. I was standing on a trapdoor with a noose around my neck, and I had been about to kick away the chair myself. So, Silas said, his eyes locking onto mine. You were saying something about filing for divorce today. I sank back into the sofa. If I file, I go to jail. If I stay, I lose half my company in 3 months when the prenup expires. No, Silas corrected me. If you stay passive, you lose everything. But if you listen to me, you walk away with more than you started. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He uncapped a fountain pen, wrote something quickly, and tore off the slip of paper. He slid it across the mahogany table. I looked at it. It was a personal check drawn on the Bank of New York. Pay to the order of Aurora Waverly. Amount $150 million. I stared at the number. The zeros seemed to stretch on forever. $150 million. What is this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Capital, Silas said. I am offering to buy a 40% stake in your private holding company. This is a legitimate business transaction. It gives you liquidity that Julian cannot touch, because it is a new asset acquisition post-separation date if we structure it correctly. Or more importantly, it gives you a war chest. I looked up at him. Why? Because Serafina is my wife, Silas said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I gave her everything. I lifted her out of obscurity. I gave her a career, a name, a life, and she repays me by conspiring with a gigolo to steal from me, to humiliate me. His hand tightened around the glass until his knuckles turned white. I do not divorce traitors. Aurora, I destroy them, but I cannot destroy Serafina without exposing my own blind spots. I need a proxy. I need someone on the inside. I need you. He leaned back, regaining his composure. Here is the deal. You do not file for divorce today. You do not file tomorrow. You wait exactly 2 months and 29 days. You want me to live with him? I asked, revulsion rising in my throat. Knowing what I know, knowing he is trying to frame me. I want you to be the loving wife, Silas said coldly. I want you to be the supportive partner. I want you to convince Julian that he has won. Make him feel safe. Make him feel arrogant. Because when a man feels arrogant, he makes mistakes. And the forgery? We will use it, Silas said. My lawyers have already drafted a counter-document. We need to get Julian to sign a separate affidavit of responsibility. We will disguise it as a tax shield for his startup. He will sign anything if he thinks it gets him money. Once he signs that, he admits to the fraud without realizing it. But we need time to position the pieces. We need to let the Phoenix deal go through, but with a modification that shifts the liability to him. 3 months, I said. You want me to act for 3 months? Think of it as the greatest performance of your career, Silas said. The check is your retainer. If we succeed, you keep the money, you keep your company, and you watch Julian and Serafina go to prison for the very crime they tried to pin on you. If you refuse, you walk out that door, you file your papers, and you are indicted by the end of the week. I looked at the check again. $150 million. It was an astronomical sum, even for me. But it wasn't the money that swayed me. It was the look in Silas Sterling's eyes. It was a reflection of my own rage. Julian wanted to play the long game. He wanted to trap me. I picked up the check. The paper felt crisp and sharp. What about Serafina? I asked. What is her fate in this? Silas smiled, and it was a terrifying sight. It was a smile devoid of humor, sharp as a blade. Serafina thinks she is a designer, he said softly. I made her. I can unmake her. By the time we are done, no one in this city will hire her to design a doghouse. She will be destitute. But first, we need them to commit. We need them to sign the real documents, the illegal ones. He extended his hand. Do we have an accord? Mrs. Waverly? I stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my suit. I picked up the check and placed it in my briefcase, right next to the divorce papers that were now useless trash. "We have a deal, Mr. Sterling," I said. I took his hand. His grip was iron hard. "Good," Silas said. "Now, go home, kiss your husband, ask him about his day, and tell him you have decided not to wait 3 months to start transferring assets. Tell him you want to start investing in his future immediately. Let's feed his greed until it chokes him." I walked out of the Olympus Club and back into the cold light of day. The city looked different now. It was no longer a landscape of threats. It was a chessboard. And I had just been given the queen. I got into the back of the Cadillac, which was waiting to take me back to my office. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. "Home," I said. "I have a dinner to prepare for my husband." As the car pulled away, I looked at my reflection in the window. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. The woman who looked back at me was a stranger, cold and calculating. Julian wanted a trophy wife. I would be the most beautiful trophy he ever held. And when he finally realized the trophy was filled with poison, it would be too late. 2 months and 29 days. Let the countdown begin. I returned to the penthouse not as the frantic woman who had left it, but as an actress stepping onto the stage for the opening night of a tragedy. The air in the apartment was still, thick with the scent of lilies I had ordered, a fragrance that now smelled like a funeral parlor. Julian was in the living room, nursing a scotch, his leg bouncing nervously. When he heard the elevator doors open, he stood up, his face a mask of practiced concern. "Aurora," he said, moving toward me. "Where have you been?" I was worried. "You ran out of here so early." I looked at him. I saw the greed in his eyes, the calculating assessment of my mood. I forced the muscles of my face to relax, softening my jaw, widening my eyes. I channeled every ounce of vulnerability I possessed. "I am sorry, Julian," I said, letting my voice tremble just enough. "I went for a walk, a long walk. I needed to think about what you said last night." I walked past him and sank onto the velvet sofa, letting my shoulders slump. "You were right, about everything." He stopped, his glass hovering halfway to his mouth. I have been paranoid," I continued, looking down at my hands. "I have been so consumed by the company, by the numbers, that I lost sight of us. I see enemies everywhere because I have been fighting a war alone. I am tired, Julian, so tired." He sat down next to me, placing the glass on the coaster. He put his arm around my shoulders. "Oh, honey, I told you, you are burnt out." "I made a decision," I said, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. "I am going to step down, not immediately, but in 3 months, after the anniversary. I want to retire from the CEO role. I want to focus on us, maybe start a family." The shock on his face was genuine. Then, it was replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated triumph. It was like watching a shark smell blood in the water. "That is... wow," he stammered. "Are you sure Ethelgard is your life?" "You are my life," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "And I want to prove it. I want to start transferring some of the operational responsibilities to you. You always wanted to be more involved, right?" "Yes," he breathed. "Yes, of course. I can help. I can take the load off your shoulders." "I knew you would say that," I smiled weakly. "I have already instructed legal to draft the transition papers." Later that night, while I pretended to sleep, I watched the notifications on my burner phone. Julian was in the bathroom, texting furiously. "Julian, she is quitting. She is handing me the keys to the kingdom. We won." Serafina. "Are you serious? Is she having a breakdown? Julian, who cares? She wants to play house. She is going to sign over operational control. 3 months. Baby, we are going to be billionaires." I lay in the dark, listening to the soft ping of his replies, and I felt a cold smile spread across my face. "Enjoy the victory lap. Julian, The track is mined. The next week was a blur of paperwork. Silas's legal team had prepared a masterpiece of deception. The documents I presented to Julian looked like standard executive power of attorney forms and asset transfer agreements. They were dense, filled with legal jargon about fiduciary duty and liability assumption. Julian, true to form, didn't read them. He scanned the headers: transfer of executive authority, assignment of capital control, and his eyes glazed over with greed. He signed his name with a flourish, using the heavy Mont Blanc pen I had bought him for his birthday. "There," he said, capping the pen. "Done. Now you can relax." He didn't know that he had just signed a document accepting full personal liability for a series of toxic debt swaps that Silas had structured into a shell entity. He hadn't just signed for power. He had signed for $100 million of debt that didn't exist yet, but with the moment the ink dried. But the financial trap wasn't enough. I needed to suffocate them with their own arrogance. "I have been thinking," I said over breakfast one morning, buttering a piece of toast with deliberate slowness. "Since we are starting a new chapter, the penthouse feels stale. It needs a refresh, new energy." Julian looked up from his phone. "Renovations now." "Yes," I said. "I want to hire the best. I saw some work in Architectural Digest recently. A designer named Serafina Vance. Do you know her?" "I think you mentioned her once." Julian choked on his coffee. He coughed violently, his face turning red. "Serafina." "Yes, I have heard of her. She is quite good. Expensive." "Expense is not an issue," I said breezily. "I want you to call her. Set up a consultation. Here, at the apartment." He looked at me, searching for any sign of a trap. I gave him nothing but a bland, eager smile. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I can find someone else." "No, I want her. Her style is exactly what we need. Do it for me. Darling." 2 days later, Serafina Vance walked into my home. Seeing her in the flesh, standing in my foyer, was a physical test of endurance. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse and tailored trousers that accentuated her figure. She carried a portfolio and an air of false modesty that made my skin crawl. "Mrs. Waverly," she extended a hand. Her skin was soft, uncalloused by hard work. "It is such an honor. I have admired your home from afar for years." "Please, call me Aurora," I said, shaking her hand. I didn't squeeze. I didn't flinch. "Julian tells me you are a genius with space." "Julian is too kind." She demurely glanced at him. I watched them. I watched the subtle, electric charge that passed between them when their eyes met. I watched how Julian stood a little taller, chest puffed out. I watched how Serafina touched her hair, preening. They thought they were being discreet. They thought I was the oblivious Mark. "I want to redo the master bedroom," I said, leading them down the hallway. "It feels too cold. I want something passionate, romantic." "I can certainly help with that," Serafina said, her voice dripping with double meaning. "I specialize in creating intimate spaces." We spent the next hour walking through the rooms. Every time I turned my back, I could feel their eyes on me mocking, conspiring. At one point, in the library, I saw Serafina run her hand along the back of Julian's arm while I was examining a fabric swatch. It was a quick, possessive gesture. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. Patience, I told myself. Let them get comfortable. Let them think they own this place. "This is going to be magnificent," Serafina concluded. Closing her portfolio, "I will draw up some sketches and send over a preliminary budget." "Wonderful," I said. And Serafina, "Don't hold back on the budget. I want the best." As she left, she kissed Julian on the cheek, a friendly goodbye that lasted a fraction of a second too long. Once she was gone. I went to the bathroom and scrubbed my hands until they were raw. I needed to cleanse myself of her presence, but I also needed to feed the beast. That evening, I enacted the next phase of Silas's plan. I sat in the living room, talking on the phone with my broker, actually one of Silas's associates. I made sure my voice was loud enough for Julian to hear from the kitchen. Yes, the Hydra project, I said. I know it is risky, but the returns are projected at 300%. It is a secret land deal in the Hudson Valley. If we get in before the zoning announcement next week, we triple our investment overnight, but keep it quiet. I do not want the board to know I am moving personal liquid funds. I hung up and saw Julian standing in the doorway, drying a dish. His ears were practically twitching. What was that about? He asked casually. Oh, nothing. I waved a hand dismissively. Just a boring land deal. High risk, high reward. I am thinking of putting $5 million into it. $5 million. Julian's eyes widened. Into land. The insider intel is solid, I whispered. But do not tell anyone. It is gray area. I saw the gears turning in his head. Greedy, desperate gears. 2 days later, the trap sprung. My monitoring software alerted me to a transaction. Julian had accessed the Blue Orchid account the money he and Serafina had been siphoning off for months. He drained it, nearly $400,000. He transferred it to a dummy corporation that Silas had set up, thinking he was buying into the Hydra project independently. He wanted to make his own fortune. He wanted to surprise Serafina with millions. Instead, he had just sent every cent of his stolen money straight into a black hole controlled by Silas Sterling. I sat in my office, watching the confirmation screen. Transfer complete. He was broke, again, and he didn't even know it, but my victory was short-lived. That afternoon, I went to the safe in the master bedroom closet to retrieve my passport for an upcoming business trip. I moved the stack of velvet jewelry boxes aside and froze. The small, leather-bound box that held my father's watch was lighter than it should have been. My hands shook as I opened it. Empty. It was a Patek Philippe Calatrava, vintage 1952. It was the only thing I had left of my father. He had worn it every day until he died. I had given it to Julian on our wedding day, telling him it was a symbol of time that I would give him all of mine. I scrambled backward, tearing through the other boxes. My diamond tennis bracelet was gone. A pair of sapphire earrings was missing. He was pawning my jewelry. He was liquidating my memories to fund his investments and to buy gifts for Serafina. I remembered the new Cartier bracelet Serafina had been wearing during her visit, the one she said was a client gift. I sat on the floor of the closet, clutching the empty watch box. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and stinging. This wasn't business anymore. This wasn't just money. This was a violation of the sacred. He had taken the memory of my father and traded it for a cheap thrill with a woman who laughed at me in my own home. I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to cry. Tears were water, and I needed to be stone. I stood up. I placed the empty box back on the shelf. I walked out to the balcony and dialed a number. Sterling? Silas's voice answered on the first ring. He sold my father's watch, I said. My voice was devoid of emotion, terrifyingly calm. And he is using the money to buy her trinkets. There was a silence on the other end, a heavy, understanding silence. We stick to the plan. Aurora, Silas said. We get the money back. We get everything back. No, I said. The plan changes. I don't just want them broke. I don't just want them in prison. I looked out at the city skyline, gripping the railing until my knuckles turned white. I want her destroyed, I hissed. I want Serafina Vance to be a pariah. I want her name to be toxic. I want her to never work in this city again. Add a clause to the final reveal. We are going to expose her professional fraud too. I want the world to know she steals designs as well as husbands. Done, Silas said. I will have my team compile the dossier on her plagiarized portfolios. By the time we are finished, she won't be able to design a napkin. Good, I said. And Silas? Yes. Make sure the car he bought her with the watch money is repossessed during the party. I want to see her face when they take the keys. Consider it done. I hung up the phone. The wind whipped my hair around my face. I felt hollowed out, carved by grief and rage into something sharp and dangerous. I went back inside. Julian was on the couch, watching TV. "Hey, babe," he smiled. "Did you order dinner?" "Yes," I said, walking past him to the kitchen to grab a knife. I needed to cut a lemon for my tea. "I ordered something special. It will be here soon." I looked at the reflection of the knife in the window. Sharp, clean, relentless, just like me. The stage was set. The actors were in position. And the script was written in invisible ink that only I could read. It was time to raise the curtain on the final act. I chose a Tuesday evening to drop the bait. It was a mundane night, the kind that usually passed with silent dinners and the hum of the dishwasher, but I ordered vintage champagne and beluga caviar. When Julian walked in, loosening his tie after a day of doing absolutely nothing, his eyes widened at the spread on the dining table. "What is the occasion?" he asked, reaching for a flute of Dom Perignon. "I have been thinking." "Julian," I said, my voice bubbling with an excitement that was purely manufactured. "About the transition, about you taking over as chairman." He froze, the glass halfway to his lips. "You have—" "Yes," I continued, stepping closer to straighten his lapel. A gesture of intimacy that made my skin crawl. "If we are going to do this, we need to do it right. We cannot just send a memo. You are a visionary. Julian, the world needs to see that. I want to use our 5th anniversary party to make the announcement." "The anniversary party?" he asked, his eyes gleaming. "I thought we were just doing a small dinner." "No," I shook my head vigorously. "I want a gala. The Plaza Hotel, the grand ballroom, 500 guests, the press, the board, the competitors. I want to introduce you as the new face of Ethelgard Dynamics. It will be your coronation." I watched the word coronation land on him. It was the perfect word. It appealed to his narcissism, his desperate need to be worshipped. He didn't just want the money, he wanted the adulation. "That sounds expensive," he said, feigning fiscal responsibility. "It is an investment in our future," I insisted. "And do not worry about the planning. I will handle everything. You just focus on writing your acceptance speech." He kissed me then, a wet, sloppy kiss that tasted of greed and champagne. "You are amazing. Aurora, truly, this is going to be huge." "Yes," I smiled against his shoulder. "It certainly will be." While Julian was busy fantasizing about his new title, the other half of the trap was being sprung across town. Silas Sterling was a man of his word. He played his part with terrifying efficiency. According to the update I received on my burner phone, Silas had taken Serafina out to dinner at Le Bernardin that same night. Over a tasting menu of seafood, he had dropped his own bombshell. He told her that he had been secretly reviewing her design portfolio, the one filled with stolen concepts and mediocre sketches, and had decided she was a genius. He told her he wanted to launch a global lifestyle brand with her as the face. To fund it, he was pledging an initial investment of $150 million. And the best part? He told her he wanted to announce this investment at the Waverly Anniversary Gala. As a gesture of goodwill to his new friends, Julian and Aurora, the symmetry was poetic. Julian thought he was becoming a chairman. Serafina thought she was becoming a mogul. Both of them believed that the gala would be the night they ascended to the Olympus of the elite. I listened to their phone call later that night through my earbuds. "Can you believe it?" Serafina squealed, her voice high and grating. 150 million. Julian Silas is finally respecting me. By the time we trigger the tax fraud trap for Aurora, I will have my own funding secured. We won't even need her money immediately, but we will take it anyway just to spite her. "It is perfect," Julian replied, his voice thick with arrogance. "Aurora is planning a coronation for me. She is inviting the press. Imagine the look on her face when the police walk in right after my speech. We will tell the media she was cooking the books to fund her lavish lifestyle. I will look like the heartbroken husband stepping up to save the company. We are going to be the kings of New York," Serafina laughed. Kings and queens, Julian corrected. I took the earbuds out. Their hubris was a physical weight in the room, heavy and suffocating. They actually thought they could arrest me at my own party. They were planning to use the very stage I was building to execute me. They had no idea the trapdoor was already under their feet. The next morning, I went to the Ethelgard headquarters early. I bypassed my office and went straight to the server room in the basement level. A place chilled to a constant 65 degrees. Waiting for me was Marcus, the company's chief information security officer. Marcus was loyal to me, not the board, and certainly not to Julian. I had paid for his daughter's leukemia treatment 3 years ago privately. He would bury a body for me if I asked. "Did you find it?" I asked, the vapor from my breath visible in the cold air. "I found everything, boss," Marcus said, spinning his chair around. He was sloppy. He used a VPN, but he logged in with his personal credentials. I have traced every single penny. On the wall of monitors, a complex web of transactions glowed in neon green. "Here is the money trail," Marcus pointed. "From the joint account to Blue Orchid LLC, then from Blue Orchid to a shell company in the Caymans. Then, and this is the funny part, back into the U.S. to purchase assets, a Porsche Cayenne, a lease on a Tribeca apartment, and get this, a down payment on a yacht." "A yacht," I repeated, shaking my head. "Of course. But here's the smoking gun." Marcus clicked a key. "The Phoenix merger documents. I found the metadata. The digital signature was applied from his laptop, not yours. He copied your cryptographic key, but the timestamp puts the device at Serafina Vance's IP address when the signing happened. So we can prove forgery," I said. "We can prove he is the architect of the entire fraud," Marcus corrected. "I have packaged it all. The logs, the IP traces, the financial flows. One click, and this goes to the SEC and the district attorney. It is a bulletproof vest for you and a coffin for him." "Hold it," I commanded. "Do not send it yet. I need the timing to be precise. Trigger the release at exactly 7:45 in the evening on the night of the gala." "You got it," Marcus nodded. 7:45. Showtime. I left the server room feeling lighter. The safety net was in place. Now I just needed the reward. That afternoon, my private phone pinged with a notification from my offshore bank in Zurich. "Incoming transfer, $150 million. Origin Sterling Holdings. Memo strategic consulting fees. Retainer." I stared at the number. It was real. Silas had moved the money exactly as promised. It was categorized as a consulting fee, fully taxable but completely legal. And most importantly, it was my separate property. It was payment for services rendered the service of destroying his wife and my husband. I transferred the funds immediately into a trust I had set up under my maiden name, locking it away where no judge and no husband could ever touch it. I was now liquid, independent, and armed with a war chest that could rival a small nation. The days ticked down. 5 days, 3 days, 2 days. The atmosphere in the penthouse was electric with unspoken tension. Julian was vibrating with energy, constantly checking his phone. Smiling at nothing, I played the part of the nervous, devoted wife, fussing over the flower arrangements and the seating charts. "Make sure the lighting is perfect for his speech," I told the event planner while Julian was within earshot. "He needs to look presidential." Julian preened like a peacock. 1 week before the event, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. It was a Tuesday evening. Julian walked into my study carrying a thick leather folder. This was it. This was the moment Silas had warned me about. "Aurora," he said, trying to sound casual but failing to hide the tremor in his hands. "These are the final papers for the transition. The lawyer sent them over. We need to sign them tonight so they can be filed before the gala." I looked at the folder. I knew exactly what was inside. These were the documents that would frame me. They contained the admission of guilt for the tax fraud scheme he and Serafina had cooked up, disguised as asset transfer forms. If I signed these, I would be confessing to federal crimes. "Of course, darling," I said, putting down my pen. Bring them here. He placed the folder on my desk. It is all standard. Just sign on the tabs. I should probably read them, I said, reaching for my reading glasses. You can, Julian said quickly, sweat beading on his upper lip. But it is exactly what we discussed. And honestly, it is mostly legalese. If we don't sign by 5, we miss the filing deadline for the quarter. He was pushing. He was desperate. Okay, I smiled. I trust you. Julian, you are the chairman now. Right? Right, he exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. I am going to grab a glass of water. Do you want one? Please, I said. As soon as he turned his back and walked out of the room, I moved with the speed of a magician. I opened the top drawer of my desk. Inside was an identical leather folder. I had prepared it days ago with the help of Silas's legal team. The exterior was the same, the weight was the same, but the contents were radically different. In this folder, the documents were not a confession of my crimes. They were a confession of his. The papers were a debt assumption and liability transfer agreement. By signing this, Julian would be acknowledging that all funds transferred to Blue Orchid, LLC, were personal loans he had taken from the company, and he was assuming full personal liability for the fraudulent tax reporting associated with them. He was also signing a confession that he had acted alone in the Phoenix merger forgery. It was disguised under the header of Executive Liability Shield, a fake legal term that sounded protective but was actually incriminatory. I swapped the folders. I dropped Julian's trap into my drawer and placed my trap on the desk. It took 3 seconds. When Julian returned with the water, I was already holding the pen, hovering over the signature line of the new folder. Here you go, he said, placing the glass down. Thank you, darling, I said. I signed my name on the witness line. Then I pushed the folder toward him. Now you need to sign to accept the appointment. He didn't even look at the text. He didn't check the headers. He was so blinded by the victory he thought he had won, so eager to close the trap on me, that he just saw the sign here stickers and obeyed. He signed his name, once, twice, 5 times, with every stroke of the pen. He was signing away his freedom. He was signing away his future. Done, he announced, slamming the folder shut. He looked at me with a grin that was almost feral. We did it, Aurora. Yes, I said, taking the folder back and locking it in my briefcase. We certainly did. He had no idea. He thought he had just handed me a suicide note. In reality, he had just signed his own confession. That night, the eve of the gala, I lay awake in bed. Julian was sound asleep beside me, snoring softly. He was dreaming of power. He was dreaming of Serafina and the millions they would spend. I turned on my side and looked at him. In the moonlight, he looked young, almost innocent. It was hard to reconcile this sleeping face with the monster who had plotted to send me to prison. But then I remembered the empty watch box. I remembered the Santal 33. I remembered the way he laughed with his mistress about stripping my carcass clean. The pity vanished. I reached out and lightly touched his cheek. A gesture that could have been mistaken for love. Sleep well, I whispered into the darkness. Sleep well, my beggar prince, because tomorrow you wake up in hell. I closed my eyes and finally slept. I slept the deep, restful sleep of a woman who knows the war is already won, and all that is left is the parade. The countdown had begun. It was 24 hours before the gala, and the air in the city felt heavy, charged with the static electricity of an approaching storm. I moved through the day with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an amputation. There was no room for error, no space for hesitation. Every gesture, every word, every breath was calculated. I started my morning not at the office, but at the atelier of a private couturier in Soho. Usually, for events of this magnitude, I wore black, navy, or perhaps a deep emerald colors that conveyed authority and stability. I was the serious CFO, the woman who balanced the books. But today, standing before the 3-way mirror, I made a different choice. The red, I told the designer. He looked surprised. The scarlet silk. It is very bold, Mrs. Waverley, very aggressive. That is the point, I replied. Running my hand over the fabric, I put it on. It was a dress designed to draw blood. It was a deep, violent shade of crimson, cut low in the back and structured at the shoulders. It did not whisper. It screamed. It was the color of a warning sign. It was the color of the target painted on Julian's back. When I looked at my reflection, I did not see a wife. I saw a warrior painted for battle. Tailor it tight, I commanded. I want them to see me breathe. When I returned to the penthouse, the atmosphere was brittle. Julian was pacing the living room, wearing a path into the Persian rug. He looked like a man holding a winning lottery ticket who was terrified he might lose it before he got to the bank. "Did you send it?" he asked the moment I walked through the door. He didn't even say hello. I knew exactly what he was referring to. The tax documents. The folder I had switched yesterday. The folder that he believed contained my confession to federal fraud, but actually contained his own admission of embezzlement and forgery. I sent it by courier this morning. "Julian," I said, placing my keys on the console table with a deliberate click. "It is on its way to the IRS processing center in Holtzville. The tracking number is on your desk." He let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. His shoulders dropped 3 inches. The relief on his face was so profound, it was almost grotesque. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that I had just mailed my own death warrant. He believed that within 48 hours, the federal agents would be knocking on our door to arrest me, leaving him as the sole victim and savior of the company. "Good," he said, wiping a sheen of sweat from his upper lip. "That is good. It is better to get ahead of the audit. Write total transparency." "Total transparency," I echoed, my voice devoid of irony. He turned away to check his phone. I watched him. A notification lit up his screen. He thought I couldn't see it from where I stood, but I had learned to read the reflection in the glass of the patio doors. Serafina. "Is it done?" Julian. "Sent. We are clear." Serafina. "Tomorrow. We are the kings and queens of New York." I turned away before my expression could betray the cold fury rising in my chest. Kings and queens. They were children playing with matches in a powder keg, and they had no idea I was holding the only fire extinguisher. At 2 in the afternoon, I had one final appointment. I told Julian I was going to the spa to prepare for the big night. Instead, I took a taxi to a nondescript parking garage in Hell's Kitchen. A black sedan was waiting in the shadows on the 4th level. I opened the back door and slid inside. Silas Sterling was there. He looked impeccable, as always, but there was a new hardness in his eyes, a grim finality. "Is everything in place?" he asked. "The venue is prepped," I said. Julian believes the lie. He thinks I'm going to prison. Silas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. It looked innocuous, like something you might use to store vacation photos. "This is the rest of it," Silas said, pressing the cold metal into my palm. "My security team finished decrypting their deleted archives this morning. Serafina's parents are flying in from Connecticut. The Vances. They are old money, Puritans. They care more about their reputation than their own children. They think they are coming to see their daughter honored for a major design award. I sent the invitation myself." "Perfect," I said. "And the others?" "The district attorney for the Southern District of New York will be at table 4. The senior editor for the Wall Street Journal is at table 6. And I have 2 plainclothes detectives from the Major Crimes Unit stationed as security near the stage." "Thank you, Silas." "Don't thank me," he said, looking straight ahead. "Just make sure you don't miss when you pull the trigger." I returned to the office, specifically to the media control room where the audiovisual team was finalizing the presentation for the gala. "Mrs. Waverley," the technician said, jumping up, "we are just rendering the tribute video, the Story of Us montage you asked for." "I have a last-minute update," I said, smiling sweetly. "I found some better quality photos. I need to swap the master file." "Sure, I can do that." He reached for the keyboard. "No," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Go grab a coffee. Mike, you have been working all day. I know how to upload a file. Give me 5 minutes." He hesitated, then shrugged. "Okay, thanks, Mrs. Waverly." As soon as the door closed, I inserted the silver USB drive Silas had given me. I found the file named gala_presentation_final.pptx. I deleted it. Then, I opened the folder on the USB. I selected a file with the exact same name, gala_presentation_final, pptx. But this file was not a montage of wedding photos and vacation clips. This file was a meticulously curated horror show. It contained the bank statements showing the theft. It contained the emails where Julian mocked the board of directors. It contained the video clips from the hidden cameras in the apartment. And it contained the screenshots of the chat logs where they discussed my suicide. I uploaded the file. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 20%, 50%, 100%, upload complete. I ejected the drive. When Mike returned with his latte, the weapon was already loaded in the chamber. "All set?" he asked. "All set," I replied. "It is going to be a show to remember." I arrived home at 6. Julian was waiting for me in the foyer, holding a small velvet box. He looked like the picture of a loving husband, if you ignored the slight tremor in his hands. "I know we are exchanging gifts tomorrow," he said, his voice thick with false sentiment. "But I couldn't wait. I wanted you to wear this tonight, as a symbol of our journey." He opened the box. Inside sat a necklace. It was flashy, a large blue stone surrounded by a halo of smaller white crystals. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like a sapphire and diamonds. But I was not an untrained eye. I knew jewelry. I knew the way light refracted through a sapphire versus a piece of heated spinel. I knew the dull luster of low-grade silver plated in rhodium. This was costume jewelry, high-end costume jewelry, perhaps, maybe worth a few $100s, but it was fake. He had sold my father's Patek Philippe for thousands, stolen millions from my accounts, and he bought me a piece of glass. He was hoarding the real money. He was keeping everything for his life with Serafina. This gift was an insult wrapped in velvet. "Oh, Julian," I said, letting out a gasp that sounded like delight. "It is stunning." "It is a custom design," he lied effortlessly. "I had it made just for you." "Help me put it on," I said, turning my back to him. I felt his cold fingers graze my neck as he clasped the cheap metal chain. It felt heavy, like a shackle. "There," he whispered against my ear. "You look expensive." I turned to face him, touching the fake stone. "Thank you, Julian. I will wear it with pride. Everyone needs to see how much you value me." He smiled, oblivious to the double meaning. "They will, Aurora. They will." That night, sleep was impossible. The city outside was a grid of amber and white lights, a sprawling circuit board of lives and lies. I sat on the terrace in my silk robe, a glass of dark red Cabernet in my hand. It was the same color as the dress hanging in my closet. I looked down at the street 72 floors below. Somewhere out there, Serafina was probably getting a beauty treatment, dreaming of her coronation. Somewhere, Serafina's parents were checking into their hotel, anticipating a proud moment for their family. Somewhere, the district attorney was ironing his shirt, unaware that he was about to witness the biggest white-collar bust of the year. I took a sip of the wine. It tasted of tannins and earth. I tried to find the sadness that had consumed me weeks ago. I tried to find the heartbreak of the woman who had cried on the bathroom floor when she realized her husband was a thief. I looked for her, but she was gone. The Aurora who loved Julian was dead. She had died the moment she heard him talk about her suicide. The woman sitting on the terrace was something else entirely. I felt cold, hollow, and incredibly clear. I was no longer a wife. I was no longer a victim. I was the hand of fate. I looked at the fake necklace sitting on the patio table. It glittered cheaply in the moonlight. "Tomorrow," I whispered to the wind. "Tomorrow." The mask falls off. I drained the glass. I didn't feel the alcohol. I felt only the icy resolve of a predator waiting for the sun to rise. The stage was built. The trap was set. All that was left was to walk into the spotlight and let it burn. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel did not just smell of expensive perfume and imported lilies. It smelled of old money and fresh desperation. The chandeliers, dripping with crystal teardrops, cast a golden, forgiving light over 500 of New York's most influential vipers. It was a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns, a murmuring ocean of people who would smile at your face while checking your stock price on their phones under the table. I walked into this arena of sharks holding the arm of the biggest fraud in the room. The flashbulbs erupted the moment we stepped onto the red carpet. It was a blinding, rhythmic strobing that usually made me squint. But tonight, I kept my eyes wide open. I was wearing the crimson silk dress, a slash of violent color in a room dominated by safe blacks and navies. It fit me like a second skin, tailored to within an inch of its life, showcasing a strength I had hidden for years under sensible business suits. Around my neck hung the cheap, fake sapphire necklace Julian had given me, a glittering badge of his disrespect. "Smile, darling," Julian hissed through his teeth, waving to a photographer from Vanity Fair. "Look happy. It is your big night. Our big night." "Julian," I corrected him, my voice smooth as polished glass. He squeezed my waist, a possessive, arrogant grip. He looked the part of the titan he desperately wanted to be. His tuxedo was bespoke, cut to hide the slight softness of a man who hadn't done a day of real work in 5 years. His hair was coiffed, his smile practiced, but I could feel the tension in his bicep. He was vibrating with a manic energy, his eyes darting around the room, scanning the crowd not for investors, but for her. We moved through the throng, accepting hollow compliments. "Aurora, you look devastating," said the CEO of a rival pharma company, kissing the air near my cheek. "And Julian, I hear rumors of a promotion. Chairman?" "We are hoping to make an announcement later," Julian replied, puffing out his chest. "We have big plans for the next quarter. A total restructuring." I took a sip of champagne. It was vintage Dom Perignon, crisp and cold. Restructuring. That was one word for it. Then, the atmosphere in the room shifted. A hush rippled through the crowd near the main entrance, followed by a wave of whispers. Serafina Vance had arrived, and she had not come quietly. She entered on the arm of Silas Sterling, but she was not dressed like a wife accompanying her husband. She was dressed like a bride. She wore a floor-length gown of pure, blinding white satin. It was backless, clinging to every curve, with a train that pooled around her feet like spilled milk. It was a deliberate, calculated insult, in the visual language of the evening. I was the Scarlet woman, the sinner, and she was the pure, victorious angel. She scanned the room, locked eyes with Julian, and gave a small, triumphant smirk. "My God," Julian whispered, his voice a mixture of lust and panic. "She looks incredible." "She looks like she's confused about whose wedding it is," I said dryly. But then again, she always did have trouble understanding boundaries. Julian glared at me, but quickly composed himself as Silas and Serafina approached us. This was the moment, the meeting of the two couples, the predator, the prey, the mistress, and the executioner. "Aurora," Silas said, nodding his head. He looked formidable in a midnight blue tuxedo. His eyes met mine, and for a microsecond, a cold understanding passed between us. The trap is set. The doors are locked. "Silas," I replied. "Thank you for coming. And Serafina, that is a brave choice of color for an evening event. Very bridal." Serafina laughed, a tinkling, artificial sound. "Oh, Aurora. White represents new beginnings and purity. I felt it was appropriate for tonight. Don't you think?" She reached out and touched Julian's arm, her fingers lingering on his sleeve right in front of me and her husband. "Hello, Julian. You look like a man who is ready to rule the world." "I feel like it," Julian said, his eyes devouring her. He was drunk on her presence, drunk on the proximity of the two fortunes he thought he was about to control. "We should catch up later," Silas said, placing a heavy hand on Julian's shoulder. "I want to hear about your vision for Ethelgard. I am thinking of increasing my position in the stock." "Absolutely," Julian beamed. "I have some ideas that will double our valuation in 6 months." We separated, drifting deeper into the party. The waiters circled like hawks, refilling glasses before they were empty. Julian was drinking scotch now, aged single malt. He was drinking it fast. His confidence was mutating into sloppiness. He leaned in close to my ear, his breath hot and smelling of alcohol. "You look beautiful, Aurora," he whispered, but his tone was mocking. "Enjoy the attention. Seriously, soak it all in, because tomorrow, everything is going to be very different for you." He was talking about prison. He thought that in less than 12 hours, I would be in a holding cell at the Federal Detention Center. Stripped of my diamonds and my dignity, I turned to him, looking him dead in the eye. I touched the fake necklace at my throat. "You are right, Julian," I said softly. "Tomorrow, you will never forget tonight. It will be burned into your memory forever." He laughed, patting my hand condescendingly. "That is the spirit." He walked away to greet a group of hedge fund managers, leaving me standing alone near a pillar. I watched him. He was loud, boisterous, slapping backs and laughing too hard at unfunny jokes. He was the picture of a man riding for a fall. I scanned the room for the other players. At table 4, I saw the district attorney, Arthur Pendleton. He was sipping water, looking bored. He didn't know yet that he was about to get the easiest conviction of his career. At table 6, the senior editor of the Wall Street Journal was checking her watch. I had promised her an exclusive that would break the internet. She was waiting, and at a quiet table near the back, looking uncomfortable and out of place, were an elderly couple, the Vances, Seraphina's parents. They looked decent, severe, and proud. They were watching their daughter in her white dress, likely thinking she was the belle of the ball. They had no idea they were attending her social funeral. The clock on the wall read 7:15 in the evening. Silas approached Julian again near the bar. I moved closer, staying in the shadows to eavesdrop. "You seem in high spirits, boy," Silas said. "Why shouldn't I be?" Julian slurred slightly. "I have the perfect wife, the perfect life, and the perfect future." "The future is a tricky thing," Silas said, swirling his drink. "It rarely turns out how we plan. Are you sure you are prepared for what comes next? The responsibility, the scrutiny." "I was born for this," Julian declared, slamming his glass down on the bar. Aurora was good with the numbers, sure, but she lacked vision. She lacked guts. I am going to take this company to places she was too scared to go. "I believe you," Silas said. And this time, he smiled. "You are certainly going places, Julian." At 7:25 in the evening, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight swept across the crowd, searching for the stage. The murmuring died down. The clinking of silverware stopped. The band played a soft fanfare. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, "please welcome your host, the Chief Financial Officer of Ethelgard Dynamics, Aurora Waverly." This was it. I walked toward the stage. My heels clicked on the parquet floor. A rhythmic drumbeat of war. I felt 500 pairs of eyes on me. I felt Julian's gaze, heavy with anticipation. He was waiting for me to announce his promotion. He was waiting for me to hand him the crown so he could execute me. I stepped into the spotlight. The red dress blazed under the halogen lights. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw Julian, standing front and center, smiling like a jackal. I saw Seraphina next to him, posing in her white dress, looking up at him with adoration. I saw Silas, standing in the shadows, his arms crossed, his face a mask of stone. I gripped the microphone. The metal was cool against my skin. "Thank you," I said. My voice was amplified, crisp and clear, filling every corner of the room. "Thank you all for being here tonight." I paused. I let the silence stretch. I let them look at me. The dutiful wife, the successful executive, the woman they thought they knew. 5 years, I continued. 5 years is a long time. In business, it is a fiscal epoch. In a marriage, it is a milestone of survival. Tonight, we are here to celebrate both. Julian nodded encouragingly, urging me to get to the part about him. My husband, Julian, has been waiting for this night for months, I said, gesturing to him. The spotlight swung to him briefly. He waved, soaking up the applause. He told me just a moment ago that tomorrow, everything will be different, and he is right. I looked down at him. The smile on my face didn't reach my eyes. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of love, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming intimate and deadly. But love is a complicated equation. It requires variables that are often missing in our world: honesty, integrity, loyalty. I saw Serafina frown slightly. This wasn't the script. "So," I said, straightening my spine, "instead of the usual toasts and platitudes, I decided to do something different. I decided to give you all a gift, the gift of truth." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. "They say that behind every great man is a woman," I said, looking directly at Serafina. "And behind every great fortune is a crime." Julian's smile faltered. He took a half-step forward, confusion clouding his drunken eyes. "I promise to announce a change in leadership tonight," I said. "I promise to show you the true face of the future of Ethelgard Dynamics." I pressed the button on the remote. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice ringing out like a judge pronouncing a sentence, "I present to you the value of loyalty." Behind me, the massive LED screen, which was displaying a looped photo of Julian and me cutting our wedding cake, flickered and went black. The room went silent. Then, the screen exploded into light, but it wasn't a photo. It was a bank statement. High resolution. Crystal clear. Account holder: Julian Waverly, Aurora Waverly, joint. Transfer to Blue Orchid, LLC. Amount $20,000. The crowd gasped. A murmur rippled through the room. Julian froze. He looked at the screen, then at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I clicked the button again. Transfer to Serafina Vance Personal. Memo rent. Tribeca. The murmur turned into a roar. I saw Serafina's parents, the Vances, stiffen in their chairs. Serafina's hand flew to her mouth. "Do not look away," I commanded, my voice cutting through the noise. "We are just getting started." I looked at Julian. The arrogance was gone. The drunkenness was gone. All that was left was the terrifying realization that the ground had just opened up beneath his feet, and he was falling into the abyss I had dug for him. "Happy anniversary, Julian," I whispered into the microphone, though the whole room heard it. "Let's see what else you have been up to." I pressed the button again. The silence that followed my first click of the remote was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and pregnant with doom. The giant LED screen behind me, which had been displaying a soft, romantic loop of our wedding photos, shifted instantly into a stark, high-contrast spreadsheet. It was ugly. It was raw. It was the mathematical proof of betrayal. The columns scrolled downward with relentless speed. Date, amount, recipient, memo, October 3rd, $50,000, transfer to Blue Orchid, LLC, memo consulting, October 10th, $12,000, purchase at Cartier, memo client gift, October 15th, $7,500, the Pierre Hotel, memo logistics. A collective gasp tore through the ballroom. It started from the front tables, where the eyesight was sharpest, and rolled back like a tidal wave. These were bankers, investors, And sharks. They knew how to read a ledger. They knew exactly what they were looking at. This was not business expenses. This was embezzlement. "What is this?" someone shouted from the back. I did not answer. I let the screen answer. November 1st, $100,000. Transfer to Cayman Holdings via Blue Orchid. Memo asset diversification. The sound of shattering glass pierced the air. Julian had dropped his tumbler of scotch. The crystal exploded against the marble floor, sending shards skittering across the red carpet and amber liquid splashing onto his patent leather shoes. He stood frozen, his hands still shaped as if holding the glass, his face drained of all color. He looked like a wax figure melting under heat. "It is a mistake," he croaked, but his voice was too weak to reach the microphone. "A glitch. Turn it off." "A mistake?" I asked, my voice amplified and booming. "Let us see if the audio is a mistake too." I pressed the button again. The spreadsheets vanished. The screen flickered to a grainy, black and white feed. The audience went deathly quiet. The video was unmistakably taken inside our penthouse. The timestamp in the corner read, 3 days ago. On the screen, Julian and Serafina were sitting on my velvet sofa. They were drinking my wine. They were laughing. It was a cruel, hyena-like laughter that echoed grotesquely through the silent ballroom. Julian's voice on the screen. "She actually believes I am going to be chairman. She is planning a gala. Can you believe the stupidity?" Serafina's voice. "She is desperate for your approval. Darling, that is why she is the perfect cash cow. You milk her dry, and then you send her to the slaughterhouse." The crowd recoiled. I saw the editor of the Wall Street Journal leaning forward, her eyes wide, typing furiously on her phone. Julian on screen. "The lawyers say if she signs the transfer documents on Tuesday, the liability shifts to her personal estate. By Friday, when the audit hits, she will be looking at 20 years for tax fraud. I will be the grieving husband, and you and I will be living in Paris on her dime." Serafina on screen. "Don't wait 3 months. Julian, make sure she signs it now. I want her out of that apartment. I want to redecorate. The smell of her perfume makes me sick." The video cut to black. The reaction was visceral. It wasn't just shock. It was revulsion. This was the elite of New York. They tolerated greed. They tolerated affairs. But they did not tolerate this level of gauche, malice-filled stupidity broadcast in high definition. No. A shriek tore from the side of the stage. Serafina Vance, the woman in the white bridal gown, had snapped. The facade of the innocent angel crumbled instantly. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure terror and rage. She lunged toward the stage, her hands clawed, aiming for me or the screen, desperate to stop the humiliation. "Turn it off, you bitch! Turn it off!" she screamed. She made it 3 steps before she hit a wall of human granite. 2 of Silas Sterling's private security detail stepped out from the shadows. They did not touch her roughly, but they formed an impenetrable barrier. She slammed into the chest of the lead guard and bounced back, tripping over her long white train. She fell to her knees on the red carpet, a fallen bride in a room full of judges. I looked down at her. "You wanted to redecorate. Serafina, I think a jail cell offers a very minimalist aesthetic. It should suit your talents perfectly." Julian finally snapped out of his paralysis. The survival instinct of a cornered rat kicked in. He lunged for the podium, grabbing the microphone stand and wrestling it toward himself. "Lies," he screamed, his voice cracking, sweat pouring down his face. "This is a deep fake. She fabricated all of it. She is the criminal." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is the one cooking the books. That is why she is doing this, to distract you. She has been embezzling from Ethelgard for years, I found out. And now she is trying to frame me." The crowd murmured. Confusion began to set in. It was a classic deflection tactic. Muddy the waters. Make it a he said, she said. But I wasn't playing that game. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria without raising a decibel. "My husband seems confused. He thinks this is a debate. It is not. It is an arraignment." I turned to the shadows on the right side of the stage. Mr. Sterling. I invited. Silas Sterling stepped into the light. The room went quiet again. When Silas moved, the ground shook. He walked up the stairs to the stage with a heavy, predatory grace. He stood next to me, towering over Julian. He took the microphone from Julian's trembling hand with a simple, effortless yank. "I am Silas Sterling," he announced, his voice deep and gravelly. "I am the primary investor in a company called Blue Orchid, LLC." He looked down at Serafina, who was still on the floor. Weeping, he looked at her with zero affection, like one looks at a stain on a rug. "I was led to believe Blue Orchid was a design firm run by my wife," Silas continued. "However, after a forensic audit concluded this morning, I have discovered that Blue Orchid is nothing more than a laundering vehicle used to siphon stolen corporate funds and evade federal taxes." He turned his gaze to Julian. "And the co-conspirator, the man who authorized these transfers and solicited the investment under false pretenses, is Mr. Julian Waverley." "No," Julian shouted, backing away until he hit the edge of the stage. "Silas, listen to me. She set me up. I didn't know." "You didn't know," I interrupted, stepping forward. I reached into my briefcase, which had been sitting on a stool next to the podium. I pulled out the leather folder, the one he had signed yesterday, the one he thought was a trap for me. "You say I am the tax cheat, Julian?" I asked, holding the documents high so the light hit the gold seal. "You say I am the one liable for the debts?" "Yes," Julian yelled, seeing a glimmer of hope. "You signed the transfer. You took the liability." I smiled. It was a smile of absolute, terrifying victory. "Actually, Julian," I said, opening the folder, "I didn't. You were so busy counting your chickens, so busy rushing to get back to your mistress, that you didn't read the header of the document you signed." I walked over to him and shoved the open page in his face. "Read it," I commanded. "Read it to the room." He looked at the paper. His eyes scanned the top line. His knees buckled. "Executive liability shield," he whispered. "Read the fine print." "Julian," I hissed. He was silent, so I read it for him. "I, Julian Waverley, hereby acknowledge that all funds transferred to Blue Orchid, LLC, were unauthorized personal loans taken against my future equity. I assume full and sole criminal and civil liability for the repayment of these funds and for any tax reporting discrepancies associated with said entities." I snapped the folder shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "You signed a confession, Julian," I said. "You admitted to embezzlement, fraud, and corporate theft, and you did it 5 times, in duplicate." I didn't read it," he stammered, looking at the crowd, begging for sympathy. "She switched it. It was a trick." "It is called due diligence," I said cold. "Something a real chairman would know about." I turned to the back of the room, toward the double doors. "Chief Pendleton," I called out, "I believe you have heard enough." Arthur Pendleton, the district attorney, stood up from table 4. He signaled to the doors. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom burst open. It wasn't just hotel security. It was a phalanx of uniformed officers from the NYPD and agents in windbreakers emblazoned with the letters FBI and IRS, CI Criminal Investigation. The fantasy was over. Reality crashed in with the force of a battering ram. "Julian Waverley," an agent shouted, moving through the stunned crowd. "Serafina Vance, you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Chairs were knocked over as guests scrambled out of the way of the advancing officers. The flashbulbs went insane. A strobe light storm, capturing every second of the downfall. Julian tried to run. It was a pathetic attempt. He scrambled toward the side exit, pushing a waiter aside, but he was tackled before he made it 10 feet. 2 officers slammed him into the wall, twisting his arms behind his back. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut, click, 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 was the sweetest music I had ever heard. "Aurora!" he screamed as they dragged him away, his face pressed against the carpet. "Help me. I am your husband. Do something." I stood on the stage, looking down at him. I didn't move. I didn't blink. "I am doing something, Julian," I said into the microphone. "I am taking out the trash." On the other side of the room, Serafina was not fighting. She had gone catatonic. A female officer was pulling her up from the floor. Her white dress was stained with red wine and dirt. Her mascara ran down her face in black rivulets as they led her past her parents' table. She looked at them, pleading. "Daddy," she whimpered. Mr. Vance, a man of rigid pride, did not stand up. He did not look at her. He turned his chair away, presenting his back to his daughter. It was a rejection more brutal than any prison sentence. Silas stood next to me, watching his wife being handcuffed. He took a sip of his drink, his expression unreadable. "Show is over," he murmured. "Not quite," I said. I looked at the crowd. They were shell-shocked, silent, staring at me with a mixture of fear and awe. They had come for a party. They had witnessed an execution. "I apologize for the disruption to your dinner," I said, my voice steady and calm. "But at Ethelgard Dynamics, we believe in cleaning house before we build the future. Please, enjoy the dessert. I hear the tart is excellent." I placed the microphone on the podium. I didn't look back at Julian, who was still screaming my name as he was hauled out the doors. I didn't look at Serafina, who was being led away like a broken doll. I walked down the stairs of the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. No one dared to speak to me. No one dared to touch me. I was radioactive with power. I walked straight to the bar. "Bartender," I said, "a gin and tonic, extra lime." My hand was steady as I took the glass. I took a sip. It was cold, bitter, and refreshing. Behind me, the screens were finally turned off. The police lights flashed through the windows. The reign of Julian and Serafina was over. My reign had just begun. The chaos that erupted in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was not the cinematic, choreographed disorder of a movie. It was ugly, visceral, and smelled of fear. The scent of expensive cologne and perfumes was instantly overpowered by the metallic tang of adrenaline and the sour stench of sudden, violent ruin. Julian had been pinned against the wall by the officers, but as the reality of the document I had just shown him sank in the document where he had assumed full liability for millions of dollars in fraud, he found a reserve of hysterical strength. He didn't fight to escape. He fought to get to me. He twisted his body, wrenching his arm free from the grasp of a startled FBI agent, and threw himself toward the stage. He didn't run. He scrambled. He fell to his knees on the plush red carpet, sliding the last few feet until he was directly below where I stood. His tuxedo was torn at the shoulder, his hair wild and matted with sweat. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and wet, filled with a terror so profound it was almost difficult to watch. "Aurora," he screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail that silenced the murmuring crowd. "Aurora, please, you cannot do this. I am your husband." The cameras were rolling. Every smartphone in the room was raised, a forest of black rectangles capturing his disintegration in real time. He was live-streaming his own demise to the world. "Get up, Julian," I said, my voice cold and amplified by the microphone I still held. "You are ruining the carpet." "I didn't mean it," he sobbed, grasping at the hem of my red dress with dirty fingers. I took a step back, pulling the silk out of his reach. "It wasn't me. It was her. It was Serafina. She made me do it." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. "She seduced me. Aurora," Julian continued, the words spilling out of him in a torrent of cowardice. "She told me she was pregnant. She told me she needed money for her medical bills. I was trying to help her. I was confused. I love you. I have always loved you." It was a lie so transparent, so pathetic, that a ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the room. He was stripping himself of every last shred of dignity, willing to destroy his lover to save his own skin. On the other side of the room, Serafina Vance had been slumped in the grip of a female officer, but when she heard Julian's words, when she heard him blame her, claim she tricked him, and declare his love for me, something inside her snapped. The catatonic shock vanished, replaced by a feral, blinded rage. "You liar!" Serafina shrieked. She bit the hand of the officer holding her. The woman cried out and loosened her grip for a fraction of a second. That was all Serafina needed. She launched herself across the few feet of space separating her from Julian. She didn't look like a human being. She looked like a banshee in a ruined wedding dress. She collided with Julian, knocking him backward onto the floor. "You coward!" she screamed, clawing at his face with her manicured nails. "You told me you hated her. You told me she was a frigid, sexless calculator. You said you couldn't wait to watch her rot in prison." "Get off me!" Julian yelled, trying to shield his face as blood welled up on his cheek where she had scratched him. "She is crazy, officer! Get her off me!" "You promised me Paris!" Serafina howled, grabbing his hair and slamming his head against the carpet. "You promised me we would be kings and queens. You used me to launder the money because you were too stupid to do it yourself." It was a spectacle of absolute grotesquerie. The two people who had thought themselves superior to everyone in the room, who had sneered at my work ethic and mocked my intelligence, were now rolling on the floor, tearing each other apart like starving dogs fighting over a scrap of meat. The police moved in then, swarming the pile of white satin and black wool. It took 4 officers to pull them apart. Serafina was kicking and spitting, her makeup smeared into a Rorschach test of madness. Julian was weeping, curling into a fetal ball, bleeding from his face. "Get them up," District Attorney Pendleton barked from the floor, "and read them their rights, loudly." The officers hauled them to their feet. The click of the handcuffs was audible even over the commotion. Julian's hands were yanked behind his back, metal biting into his wrists. Serafina was cuffed next, her arms twisted awkwardly behind the ruined white dress. "Julian Waverly and Serafina Vance," an FBI agent announced, his voice booming. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you start using it." But Serafina wasn't looking at the agent. She was looking frantically around the room, her eyes darting through the crowd until they landed on table 12. "Daddy," she cried out, her voice breaking into a childish whimper. "Mom, please tell them who I am. Call the lawyers. Don't let them take me." The room turned to look at the Vances. William and Margaret Vance were stalwarts of Connecticut society. They were people who believed that a public display of emotion was a sin, and a public scandal was a death sentence. They sat at their table, untouched by the chaos, their posture rigid. Mr. Vance stood up slowly. He adjusted his cufflinks. He looked at his daughter, who was weeping, handcuffed, and covered in wine and blood. His face was a mask of granite. There was no pity in his eyes, only a profound, icy detachment. "Daddy," Serafina begged. "Mr." Vance turned to his wife. "Margaret, I believe our car is waiting. This party has become distasteful." "Yes, William," Mrs. Vance replied, picking up her clutch. She didn't even look in Serafina's direction. They turned their backs on their only child. "No," Serafina screamed as they began to walk toward the exit. "You can't leave me. I am your daughter." "Mr." Vance paused for a brief second. He didn't turn around. He simply spoke to the air. "We have no daughter. Our daughter died the moment she brought shame upon this family." Then they walked out, passing right by the officers who were holding Serafina, without breaking stride. Serafina let out a sound that wasn't human, a low, broken wail of absolute abandonment. She slumped in the officer's grip, her legs giving out. She was not just arrested, she was orphaned. Silas Sterling, who had been watching the scene from the stage with his arms crossed, finally moved. He walked down the stairs, his steps heavy and deliberate. He approached Serafina. The officers stepped back slightly to let him pass. Recognizing the power of the man who had orchestrated this entire takedown, Serafina looked up at him through her matted hair. A flicker of hope ignited in her eyes, the desperate hope of a woman who has always relied on men to save her. "Silas," she whispered. "Silas, please, I am your wife. You can't let them do this. I will do anything. I will go to therapy. I will sign whatever you want." Silas looked down at her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He didn't hand it to her. He tucked it into the bodice of her dress, right next to her pounding heart. "You have already signed everything that matters. Serafina," Silas said, his voice devoid of anger, which made it terrifying. "That is a copy of our prenuptial agreement, specifically, the infidelity clause." He leaned in closer, so only she and the immediate circle could hear. "My lawyer will be meeting you at the arraignment tomorrow morning, not to defend you, but to serve you with divorce papers. You leave this marriage with exactly what you brought into it. Nothing. The apartment is mine. The jewelry is mine. Even the clothes on your back were paid for by my credit card." He straightened up and signaled to the officers. "Take her away. She is trespassing." Serafina began to scream again, a raw, throat-tearing sound, as they dragged her toward the exit. "Silas, you can't do this. I will kill you. I will kill all of you." Her threats faded as the heavy double doors swallowed her and the police escort. Now, only Julian remained. He was being led out by 2 federal agents. He was limping, his shoes scuffing the floor. He looked at me one last time. The anger was gone. The scheming was gone. There was only the hollow look of a man who knows his life is over. "Aurora," he whispered. It wasn't a beg this time. It was just a name. I looked down at him from the height of the stage. I felt nothing. No love, no hate. Just the clinical satisfaction of closing a ledger that had been unbalanced for too long. "You know, Julian," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the speakers, "you spent months worrying about the 5-year mark. You were obsessed with getting 50% of my assets." I paused, letting the words hang in the silence. "Congratulations," I said, a small, cold smile touching my lips. "You didn't get 50% of my money, but you just earned 100% of New York's contempt. Spend it wisely in prison. I hear the commissary is expensive." He flinched as if I had struck him. He lowered his head, unable to meet the gaze of the hundreds of people staring at him with undisguised disgust. "Get him out of here," I commanded the agents. They marched him out. The doors closed behind him with a final, resonant thud. For a moment, the ballroom was silent. Then, a single person started clapping. Then another. Then another. It wasn't polite applause. It was the raucous, adrenaline-fueled applause of a crowd that had just witnessed a gladiatorial execution. They were cheering for the blood. They were cheering for the winner. They didn't care about justice. They cared that the show was spectacular. I looked out at them. The sharks, the vipers, my peers. They were smiling at me, raising their glasses. They weren't horrified by what I had done. They were impressed. I had shown them that I was the biggest shark in the tank. Silas Sterling walked back up the stairs to the stage. He stood next to me. He didn't try to hug me or comfort me. He signaled to a waiter who hurried over with 2 glasses of whiskey. "Neat." Silas handed one to me. "To effective risk management," he said, raising his glass. I looked at him. We were partners in destruction. We had dismantled 2 lives in under 30 minutes. There was no romance between us, no warmth, just the cold, hard bond of mutual utility and shared vengeance. "To closing the deal," I replied. We clinked glasses. The crystal rang out, a clear, sharp note that cut through the noise of the party. I took a sip of the whiskey. It burned going down, a cleansing fire. I looked at the empty spot on the floor where Julian had knelt. The carpet was stained with wine and a few drops of blood. I would have to have it replaced, or maybe I would keep it. A reminder that in the game of power, mercy is a liability, and freedom is the only asset that truly appreciates over time. The band hesitated, unsure of what to do. "Play something," I ordered, turning to the conductor. "Something upbeat. The funeral is over. The band struck up a jazz standard. The guests began to talk, the volume rising to a roar of gossip and excitement. I stood on the stage, glass in hand, watching them. I was alone. I was divorced. I was the subject of the biggest scandal of the decade, and I had never felt more at peace. The morning sun hit the gray, brutalist concrete of the Metropolitan Correctional Center, with an indifference that felt entirely appropriate. It was 10 in the morning on the day after the gala. The city was already moving, millions of people rushing to jobs and coffee shops, oblivious to the fact that the social hierarchy of New York had been violently rearranged the night before. I walked into the facility wearing a white cashmere coat and oversized sunglasses. I looked like a widow, but I felt like a bride. The air inside smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale despair. I checked my purse at the security desk, keeping only one item with me, a manila envelope. I was led to a small, sterile visitation room. There was a thick glass partition dividing the space. On the other side sat a man who bore a vague, haunting resemblance to the husband I had lived with for 5 years. Julian was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. His hair, usually styled to perfection, was matted and greasy. His face was swollen from crying, and there was a dark bruise on his cheek where Serafina had struck him. He looked small. He looked finite. When he saw me, he lunged at the glass. His eyes were wide and frantic. "Aurora!" he rasped through the metal grate. "Thank God. You came. You have to get me out of here. The lawyer says they are denying bail. They are talking about 20 years. Aurora, 20 years. I sat down slowly. I did not take off my sunglasses. "Hello, Julian," I said. My voice was calm, conversational. "I imagine the accommodations are not what you are used to. No Egyptian cotton sheets." "Stop it," he hissed, looking around nervously at the guard standing by the door. "This is not funny. You made your point. You humiliated me. You destroyed Serafina. You won? Now, get me out. Call Silas. Tell him to drop the charges." "Silas does not drop charges, Julian," I replied. "And neither do I." He leaned closer to the glass, his breath fogging the surface. A nasty, desperate glint appeared in his eyes. "You have to help me," he whispered, "because if I go down, I am taking you with me." I tilted my head slightly. "Is that so?" "I know things," he said, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. "I know about the off-book accounts at Ethelgard. I know about the experimental protocols we rushed through the FDA. I know where all the bodies are buried. Aurora, if you leave me here to rot, I will sing to the feds. I will tell them everything. I will destroy your company." He sat back, looking smug. He thought he had played an ace. He thought he still had leverage. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh, bright and amused. "Oh, Julian," I said, shaking my head. "You really do not pay attention. Do you? You are threatening to burn down a house that I no longer live in?" "What are you talking about?" He frowned. "Ethelgard Dynamics," I said, leaning forward. "As of 8 o'clock this morning, it is no longer my company. In fact, it is no longer an independent entity." I watched the confusion spread across his face. "I sold it, Julian. I sold my entire controlling stake, along with the board's approval, to a private equity group led by Silas Sterling. The deal was signed, sealed, and the funds wire transferred an hour ago. The sale price was a record-breaking figure. The company you are threatening to destroy is now owned by the man who put you in this cell. Do you really want to try to blackmail Silas Sterling from inside a federal prison?" Julian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color drained from his face until he looked like a ghost. You sold it?" he stammered. "But that company was your life." "No," I corrected him. "It was my job. My life is what I am taking back today." I slid the manila envelope through the slot at the bottom of the glass partition. "These are divorce papers," I said. "Uncontested. You waive all rights to spousal support. You waive all claims to any assets, past, present, or future. You accept full responsibility for the legal fees. He looked at the papers, then back at me. And if I don't sign, then my lawyer, who is currently having coffee with the district attorney, will hand over a supplementary file, I said. We found the hard drive in your safe, Julian, the one with the blackmail photos of the board members. If I add extortion to your list of charges, you won't get 20 years. You will get life without parole. You will die in this orange suit. I pulled a pen from my pocket and slid it through the slot. Sign it, I commanded. And you can keep the pen. Consider it a parting gift. Julian looked at the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He looked at me one last time, searching for a trace of the woman who used to make him coffee every morning. The woman who had nursed him when he had the flu. The woman who had loved him. He found only a reflection of his own defeat in my dark lenses. He uncapped the pen. He signed the papers. He shoved them back through the slot. I hope you rot in hell. Aurora, he whispered. I have been living in hell for 5 years. Julian, I said, standing up and buttoning my coat. I just checked out. I turned and walked away. I did not look back. I did not feel sad. I felt the specific, weightless sensation of a tumor being removed. I walked out of the heavy steel doors and into the bright sunlight of the street. A black limousine was idling at the curb, the rear window rolled down. Silas Sterling was sitting inside. He looked immaculate in a gray suit. He didn't smile, but there was a look of respect in his eyes that had not been there when we first met. Is it done? He asked. He signed, I said, holding up the envelope. Good, Silas nodded. My team will handle the filing. You are a free woman. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and pulled out a check. He held it out to me through the open window. Here, he said. I looked at it. It was a cashier's check. $150 million. What is this? I asked. You already paid me the consulting fee. The deal is closed. This is a bonus, Silas said. You handled yourself well last night. You have a ruthless streak. Aurora, I like that. I am building a new conglomerate. I need a partner who isn't afraid of blood. This check is a signing bonus. Come work with me. We could own this city. I looked at the check. $300 million in total. It was enough money to buy islands. It was enough money to buy governments. I looked at Silas. He was offering me the world, but he was offering it on his terms. He was a shark, and sharks don't have partners. They have pilot fish. If I took this money, if I joined him, I would just be trading one cage for a larger, more expensive cage. I would trade a husband who tried to control me for a business partner who would own me. I reached out and took the check. Silas smiled, thinking he had won, thinking that everyone has a price. I held the check up to the sunlight. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, I tore it in half, then in quarters, then into confetti. Silas's smile vanished. His eyes narrowed. Do you have any idea what you just threw away? I know exactly what I threw away, I said, letting the pieces of paper flutter to the sidewalk like expensive snow. I threw away a leash. I don't understand, Silas said cold. The first $150 million was business. You took that? That was my fee, I said. I earned that. That was for my time, my company, and my pain. But this, I pointed to the scraps on the ground. This is a bribe. This is you trying to buy my loyalty, and I am done selling myself to men who think they can own me. I stepped back from the car. I am not your partner, Silas, I said, and I am certainly not your employee. I am your equal. Maybe one day our paths will cross again. If they do, bring your best game, because I will be ready. Silas stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded, a curt, sharp nod of recognition. Driver, he commanded. Go. The window rolled up, and the limousine pulled away, disappearing into the traffic of Lower Manhattan. I stood alone on the sidewalk. The wind blew through my hair. I took a deep breath. The air tasted of exhaust fumes and hot dogs in the Hudson River, and it was the sweetest thing I had ever tasted. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number. "Hello, Sarah," I said to my assistant. "Mrs. Waverly," she answered, sounding anxious. "Are you okay? The news is going crazy. Reporters are camped out in the lobby." "I am fine, Sarah," I said, "but I have some instructions. First, I want you to leak the sale of the company to the press immediately. Second, I want you to call the movers. Put the penthouse on the market. Sell it as is, furniture, clothes, everything. I don't want a single teaspoon from that life." "Okay," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "And where should I send your files?" "Nowhere," I said. "Burn them." "And?" "Mrs. Waverly, where are you going?" I looked up at the skyline. I saw the steel towers, the monuments to ambition and greed. I had conquered this city. I had burned it down and walked out of the ashes in red silk. Now, I wanted something else. I wanted silence. I wanted art. I wanted to remember who I was before I became a wife, before I became a CFO, before I became a weapon. "Book me a ticket to Paris, Sarah," I said. "One way, for tonight." "Okay, one way to Paris," she repeated, typing. "And Sarah, should I book it under Mrs. Waverly?" I smiled, a genuine, soft smile that reached my eyes. "No," I said. "Book it under Sinclair. Aurora Sinclair." "Understood, Ms. Sinclair." I hung up the phone. I started walking. I didn't know exactly where I was going, and for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I walked past the courthouse, past the jail, past the banks. I walked until I was just a woman in a coat, indistinguishable from the millions of others, fighting for her place in the world. I had entered this war as a victim. I had fought it as a villain, but I was leaving it as something entirely new. I was free. The camera pulls back, rising higher and higher above the bustling streets of New York. We see Aurora, a small but undeniable figure in white, walking against the flow of the crowd, disappearing into the infinite possibilities of her own future. The screen fades to black. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and ultimate redemption. I hope Aurora's journey reminded you that no matter how deep the trap, you always have the strength to break free. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story from right now? Are you in your car, at the gym, or relaxing at home? Drop your location in the comments below. I love seeing our global community come together. If you enjoyed seeing Julian and Serafina get exactly what they deserved, please make sure to subscribe to Scarlet Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, stay strong and never settle for less than you deserve.